It's their livelihood. It's how they feed themselves. When they can fish, they have to go fishing. When they can't fish, they have no livelihood. They have no income. They have no food. So climate change is increasingly a real issue. Kind of linked to that a little bit, resource management. The Department of Fisheries seems to have one KPI, which is catch more fish. They don't seem to have much of a remit for habitat conservation. Fish are born, hatched. Fish reproduce in coastal ecosystems, mangroves, seagrass meadows, and coral reefs. And these are the three which are most at risk from coastal development, from climate change, from tourism development, from increased tourism. And yet these three ecosystems are important for the nursery of fisheries. And we are not looking after those resources very well. We do have marine protected areas. They are very small. They are very, very individually separated. So you've got two islands which are actually biologically connected, but we're not managing them in that sense. We're managing those little pockets of biodiversity with not a lot of bigger picture involved here. And overall, if I could summarize what people are saying, it seems to me that they're saying that fisheries is just not managed very well. Licensing, encroachment, enforcement, incentives, technology, funding, livelihoods, just, the department in charge, like I said, has one KPI, it's catch more fish, which is not helpful to a lot of people. Fisheries is not just about, just briefly linking it to SDGs. I've got a list of 8 SDGs here that is linked to fisheries, not just SDG 14, life below water, but it's related to poverty issues. We've already mentioned it's fishing communities, mainly in the B40. It's related to zero hunger, gender equality. Even though fishing people tend to be men, women are involved at many stages of the supply chain. For example, in Mantanani, the female population are responsible for the dried fish production. So the men will go and catch the fish, and the women will then produce dried fish, which is sold on the mainland in the YB Isnarinas constituency. Decent work and economic growth, reduced inequalities, climate action, life below water, peace, justice, and strong institutions all have quite strong links to the fisheries sector. Like I said, it's only 1% of GDP. It's only 1% of it. It's a small employer. Nonetheless, it has a lot of links to coastal communities, different parts of coastal communities, and also ourselves. Where do we get our fish from? We get it from coastal communities. Just a couple of brief anecdotes on overfishing. The last trawl survey, so this is the last assessment of fish stocks in Malaysia in 2016, showed that stocks had dropped by 88% since the 1960s. So we've not got many fish left. And in 2019, the Fisheries Department revealed that Malaysia had lost 96% of its demersal fish stocks in less than 60 years due to overfishing. So we've only got 4% of the fish left, and yet we're still creating more licenses for people to go out and catch these fish, which is a little bit short-sighted. Habitat destruction, again, a variety of things here: coastal development, land reclamation, sand mining. We're destroying the mangroves, the seagrasses, and coral reefs that are all functionally linked, which means there are two things. one, less fish for the small-scale fishermen in the coastal area, but also two, less forage fish leaving the coastal areas to the pelagic and demersal fisheries. So there's less food for the bigger fish to eat. So if you're relying on tuna-type fish as a large fishery from pelagic areas, and you're not feeding them with smaller fish from the coastal areas, then your pelagic zone fisheries are going to decline as well. So these things are all connected. A final word. There are many issues facing, I'm going to read this out. There are many issues facing fisheries management, the most critical of which is overfishing of the inshore areas by both licensed and illegal fishermen. Other issues include competition between traditional commercial fisheries, competition for the use of the coastal zone, rate of fishing effort, use of destructive fishing methods, and destruction of mangroves and impacts of pollution. To ensure that a healthy fisheries industry is maintained, it will be necessary to reduce the fishing effort in the inshore areas through licensing and proper management, as well as through the protection and rehabilitation of the marine environment. I quoted that verbatim because it's taken from a report released in 1996. So 25 plus years later, we haven't addressed any of those issues. Hence the small scale fishermen have problems. That's all I have to say for now. I'm happy to answer questions, which I'm sure Lavanya's got plenty of.
Thank you, Julian. 175,000 fishermen, 1% of GDP, 10% of compared to the tourism industry. I would agree that if you were to just take it from a monetary value, it's not that much. But 57 kilograms of fish per person per year and depletion of the stocks is not a bright situation to look at. And I know WWF has your list of endangered fish here.
Save our seafood.
Yeah, save our seafood, right? So, Lavanya, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Julian, for that, and Anthony. Thanks for the invitation to be a reviewer of this really interesting report. I think some of those very key points that Julian, you highlighted just now, it might be 1% of our GDP, so to speak, but tourism industry is not going to fill our stomachs, if you like, with protein. So I think, in a way, some of the importance that we place on some of these sectors maybe need to also be looked at differently. You cannot just look at GDP, I suppose, is my point here. Really, the value that it brings to well-being, might be something we want to flesh out a little bit in some of these things. I think you raised quite a lot of very interesting statistics, in terms of the stocks depleting, but I don't recall reading that in the report itself. And I think that would be also interesting context setting to state, how much we have already lost in terms of fish stock, in the last 60 years or so, that data that you just mentioned, right? And that's all based on government-related studies. So I think it'd be good for us to just put it, factually there and make the reference to the relevant references. In terms of the coverage, I know you're bound by what the areas that have been looked at. I'm just wanting to query, and please feel free to jump into answers straight away if you feel that's needed. You've said in the report as well, and just now, that that there is a difference in the range which these SSF, is that right?
Yes.
SSF fishers can go. So in I think East Coast and West Coast of Peninsular Malaysia, you have different ranges, right? 0 to 5 nautical miles, 0 to 8 nautical miles. What about Sabah and Sarawak? And then the other thing is, were there any issues relating to inland fishing, which we might have come across? And the third area is maybe aquaculture as well, because I had the good fortune of going for the visit to Burra. And in Burra, we met some of these people who were doing aquaculture, and they had some issues relating to their activity because of pollution from upstream, the oil palm, and then the sand dredging and all that. So, I mean, I guess what we are seeing is all these systems, in a way, these ecosystems are obviously related. But I think this research that we have been undertaking, the field work that we've been undertaking, is just enlightening us further as to how much it's impacting the livelihoods of people, and how much people's traditional activities are being affected when you don't look at things more holistically. So I think that issue of pollution was raised, but if we could also maybe give specific examples, even with regard to those people who are doing aquaculture activities. Again, I don't know what information you are basing your findings on.
So, can I react to that? respond. Sorry, not react. Um,
I'm just.
you're- there were some inland fishermen included.
Mm.
And yeah, I take your point. Their issues were not specifically mentioned in what I just said.
Mhm.
Their issues are mentioned in the report a little bit, but perhaps they don't get fair coverage. You're right. Perhaps then we need to pull a little bit more of that out. Their issues are around supply of small fish and around access to markets and around and pollution issues very much. It's interesting. Aquaculture is actually a huge proportion of fish supply in Malaysia. I think something like 40%. But I don't see inland fishermen in Gua Musang in the same set as coastal fishermen from Kemaman, for example. And so my own bias has probably led me to kind of de-emphasize that group. A little bit unfair, I would guess. I would agree. So noted, and I will see if I can pull some stuff out about the issues of the inland fishermen.
Because I think in terms of recommendation, also remember we discussed this about the black soldier fly and providing alternative feed source to them, and then creating industries around that could be something that we can put into this recommendation, in this situational analysis, if we sort of capture those issues also in terms of fish feed and all that for the aquaculture sector.
Okay.
I think there are some issues that have been raised, and I did ask Shantini also to have a look at it because she's our resident marine expert. Yeah. So she was also, grateful that this exercise is being done, and maybe I'll share some of the comments that she shared as well, which I also saw as I read through. One is maybe we need to be more defined and specific in terms of which areas SSF covers, right? Because I think sometimes we mention inshore, sometimes we mention other terminology in the context of who we are talking about. It might just be a glossary where we can just put, these are the areas that we have covered, but just to make that maybe a bit more clear in terms of for the reader, basically.
Okay.
And let's see. And I think this was a point that you've already clarified, but just to check again, those 175,000 are the small scale fishes. They're not the entire.
I'm pretty sure about that,
Right.
but let me just check
Okay.
the reference. Yeah.
And also in terms of the GDP contribution, it's their contribution. So it's just those things. Just wanted to make sure that.
Sure.
And then I was reading also, the some of the transcripts that was provided, and there was one issue that was raised, which I thought was quite interesting, on licensing, and it seemed to suggest that there are people who obtain licenses simply to then be able to access these subsidies, maybe the living subsidies or whatever it is, without actually going out to fish. And they in turn deprive actual fishermen of licenses, because remember, there's a limited number of licenses available. So they are deprived of their livelihood, and it's that kind of problem, which maybe we can flesh out a little bit more, because I think this whole idea of subsidies and subsidy rationalization is quite important, and it maybe needs a bit more sort of explanation, So I was wondering whether we could actually look at generally some of the major issues that are faced by the small scale fishers that we are aware of, either from literature review and things like that. Some of it, of course, from licensing, and then that's also corroborated by what we are hearing on the ground, right?
Okay.
And then from that, we can really go into very specific recommendations. Because some of the recommendations here are important, but they are a bit too, they're just too high level and maybe not something that we can implement or recommend directly. But if we can, sort of look at it from that perspective, looking at, some of the issues that we are kind of already aware of, and then looking at what we are hearing from these fishermen, which either relate to or corroborate, and then try and, sort of say, therefore, we need to really look at the licensing regime, make sure that licenses are provided to those who are actually going out to fish. And in terms of and then maybe that livelihood subsidy, there must be some mechanism to link it to actually people who are doing that activity rather than just because they hold a license, and then that issue of enforcement and encroachment. When I read the report, I was a bit confused because it seemed there's the zoning and licensing, which doesn't seem to quite work because there's still encroachment. But that encroachment appears to be legal encroachment rather than illegal encroachment. By the way it's written, it's like they use bigger engines or whatever it is, and they seem to be able to encroach into these areas. I'm not sure whether I'm reading it correctly, Julian, but yeah.
I'll talk to that one. I hear what you said about the other things, and I understand that. Yeah, this thing about what I mentioned, dead fishermen, but there are people who are going for a license because they know the man at DOF gives them a license, and they go for the subsidy. They don't fish. Yeah. So, okay. With the encroachment enforcement is a difficult one. You can't enforce until someone has encroached. But if somebody's going out through the coastal fishing zone to the deeper fishing zones, they're not encroaching, they're traveling through. So it is a bit difficult. What we're really talking about is fishermen who have a license for the deeper water zones, but come into the shallow water zones. So they're encroaching in that, and there is insufficient enforcement to catch them and to deal with it. So you want me to try and clarify the language on that a bit?
Yeah, because there was, I think one of the recommendations was around licensing, and it kind of suggested that, that there's the zoning activity and licensing regime, but it does not seem to be working to support or to safeguard the resources for the SSF community. And that, to my mind, seemed to suggest that somehow these trawlers or whatever was supposed to be outside this area are able to access fish within the 0 to 5 or 8 nautical miles, but they are not actually encroaching. So they're not doing anything illegal, but for some reason they're able to do so because they have bigger engine capacity or whatever. That's how I read it, but that may not be how it was meant to be conveyed. But the other one, in terms of encroachment, that's clear. Yes, some people are actually, illegally coming in, right? That's illegally coming into areas they're not supposed to be coming into and fishing. And I think that you have also examples given by some of those fishermen, either they are foreigners or even, in Terengganu, they said people from Kelantan and Pahang or whatever come in as well, right? Yeah. So that's clearly encroachment and clearly an enforcement issue. But this other one where it was in the report somewhere about why licensing and the zoning regime may not necessarily work, I was a little bit confused. So if that, yeah.
Let me have a look for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Encroachment is clear and straightforward.
Yes.
You have a license for a 15 GRT vessel, you're supposed to go 20 nautical miles out, period. You're not allowed to fish inside of that. If you are fishing inside of that, you're encroaching, and there should be enforcement to stop you from doing it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely clear.
Yeah, that's clear. And the fact
Not sure about the licensing thing. Let me have a look at it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
How unkind do you wish me to be to the Department of Fisheries?
Not unkind per se, but this is really, sort of pulling out what
The fishermen are telling us.
fishermen are telling us.
Yeah, but the DOF's not going to respond well to that.
I mean, this is for us to really have a very objective view of what are the issues on the ground, right? And this is what we are hearing. So
Quite clearly.
yeah. So I mean, the thing that people have even reported encroachment, but no action is being taken is something that needs to be mentioned, because DOF may not realize that such a thing is happening. That might relate back to that point on corruption that was put somewhere in there. But again, the linkage is not very clear, that unless we kind of build it maybe more systematically.
Okay.
Yeah.
If the facilitator can just add something in. The same stories came in from Kuantan, from Angabatu, Setiu, from Moa, and this thing of encroachment is one, where there's ABC license. So the B license guys are coming into A license. A license guys are finding that the amount of fish within their zone is being depleted. So, and it's not that they don't inform fisheries. Fisheries have been informed, but the reply they come back, we don't have enough people to do it. So that's, I think, to put it in a more positive manner, that perhaps more enforcement personnel to be deployed by the fisheries department.
Yes, I
Yeah.
would agree with that. I mean, it is lack of people. It's partly a lack of people, partly a lack of resources and training.
Yeah.
But it's part of that. And they just need to recognise that they've got to put more people out there. Why are they not doing that? That's a rhetorical question. Is perhaps because they see their role as fisheries development and not fisheries management. Because the fisheries development is easy, relatively. You've got LKIM trying to advise fishermen doing research on aquaculture. That's easy. Managing requires you to deal with people, and that's always tough. And we have the same problem with the management of the marine parks. So I'm following a train of thought myself here. We have the same problem with the marine parks. They're very good at setting up the things, and they've got the boats there to do the patrolling enforcement, but they never go and talk to the people on the ground about what they think about the marine parks, because that's dealing with people and it's difficult. So their strengths are technical, their weaknesses are managerial.
Human management.
Human resources related. It is. Okay.
So, I mean, just again, just thinking out loud when you were talking about that, we face the same problem in the forests, right? And there's not enough boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And one of the recommendations was to then employ, local communities and
IPLCs,
yeah,
as they're called these days.
yeah, IP and MCs, apparently, to
Oh, we
separate.
have to put that in.
Yes.